Hey everybody, welcome to the channel. Michael Noland here with the big one, finally. My review and my comments on Led Zeppelin's masterpiece by any sense of that word, Physical Graffiti. Physical Graffiti, of course, was the album that Led Zeppelin released after Houses of the Holy and before Presence. Now, it's a double album, and at 83 minutes, it's what I consider a full double album. There are 15 songs, 8 new ones. The rest are songs written and even recorded prior to the recording of this album proper. But these weren't just mere outtakes. These were songs that were nearly on Led Zeppelin albums, but were wisely, I feel, taken off of those albums, but fit so wonderfully on this magnificent piece of artwork. Now, initially, recordings for this album were to start in 1973. I think it was around November. But it was at this time that John Paul Jones was totally burnt out. There was even talk of him leaving the group. Peter Grant, a great manager, by the way, suggested that he take some time off. They were all set to record at Headley Grange, the wonderful Headley Grange, and this time, instead of the Rolling Stones mobile studio, they had access to Ronnie Lane's mobile studio. And okay, so now when everything's all set up to get the ball rolling, as I told you, John Paul Jones needed a bit of time off. So they delayed the beginning of the recording process, and this actually allows for a brand new act signed to Swan Song Records, Bad Company, and they recorded their magnificent masterpiece, their very first album, Bad Company, of course. And that's a video that is going to be coming out, folks, because it's tied into this story, and it's just such a terrific story in itself and a wonderful, magnificent, classic piece of artwork in rock and roll. So the band has to convene early in 1974, and that's where the whole process really begins. Now, along with past tracks that they are choosing purposely to revive for this project, they also have a basic recording and a working of what would become Kashmir. This piece, of course, was put together by John Bonham and Jimmy Page. You know, the best drummer in rock and roll, right? Okay, so now with all of this kind of coming into the mix, you can almost see Led Zeppelin's mind working here. This was going to be an album. You see, as far as I'm concerned, Led Zeppelin kind of arrived to their later period with Houses of the Holy. And of course, I've already expressed how I feel that Led Zeppelin 3 and 4 were Led Zeppelin in their mid-period, with Led Zeppelin 1 and 2 being their early period. But instead of an album that they could have produced just with the 8 new tracks, right, that would have established that they had not only leveled up as they had with their previous album, Houses of the Holy, but they had learned to even gloss that sound a bit further. But not Led Zeppelin, not this collective group of minds. They're seeing something much like what the Beatles were seeing for their magnificent double album, The Beatles, aka The White Album. Here they purposefully spin an album that represents them from their mid-period right up into the very absolute grandeur of the track, my second favorite Led Zeppelin track of all time, Kashmir. And if you've seen any of my videos, you of course know that it loses by a narrow margin to the Battle of Evermore in my mind. All right, so first up, Custard Pie. Lyrically, this song is a song we've heard many times through the blues format, right? I'm a backdoor man, baby, I have no scruples, you're mine. But the bluesy tale is still intriguing, isn't it? With Robert Plant supplying some of his finest harp work, we almost get that early Led Zeppelin sound, right? And yet, not quite. because John Paul Jones is on a clavinet and Jimmy Page is playing his guitar riffs through an ARP synthesizer, a blend of the old, the middle, the new. Definitely the perfect cut to start this magnificent album, and one of my favorite Led Zeppelin cuts. Next up, The Rover. Now, Jimmy had written this song years before, and he had written it primarily as an acoustic piece, but they had reworked it electronically, and it was set for Houses of the Holy. And so basically, all they had to do is have Jimmy Page re-record some guitar parts for this song, and it was complete with some very interesting lyrics by Robert Plant, again alluding to the various elements and colors, and we'll get into that in another video as well. And all too soon, side one ends with the magnificent In My Time of Dying. Now, this total arrangement to this song was actually led by John Bonham. One of Led Zeppelin's most magnificent ultra pieces at 11 plus minutes. This is the perfect song to end side one. It leaves you in anticipation of what is yet to come on this already great album. And of course, it ends with a bit of studio chatter we hear as the song breaks down in the end. And I'm, of course, a big fan of that, as I've explained in past videos many times. Side one, great groove, wonderful tunes. I'm ready for side two. Next up, Houses of the Holy kicks off side two. And with this recording, they did no further overdubbing. This was to be on their album, Houses of the Holy, right? But Led Zeppelin felt it sounded inferior to their ears to the similar Dancing Days. I guess if I use my imagination, I can hear similarities, but to tell you the truth, if Houses of the Holy had this track on it with everything else it had, and they had the room to put it on, it would rank so much higher in my favorite Led Zeppelin albums than it already does. All right, so second song, side two, Trampled Underfoot, developed from a jam session. Are you kidding me? And when you realize that as they're developing this, it's Bonzo to the rescue, actually stepping up to the mighty Jimmy Page, suggesting, why don't you riff instead of these dumb chords you're playing? And Jimmy Page, humble enough to take it, and they develop this wonderful track, one of my very favorite Led Zeppelin tracks. Next up, my second favorite Led Zeppelin song of all time, the magnificent Kashmir, a song that was primarily started by both Bonzo and Jimmy Page at Headley Grange, and they brought these tapes along for further development, and brother, further development happened. First of all, John Paul Jones comes in with the Mellotron. Not only that, but he writes and arranges for the strings that would accompany this magnificent masterpiece of a song. Something this magnificent needed truly superior lyrics, and lyrics inspired perhaps from somewhere else than Robert Plant had fully investigated before. Well, he got the inspiration while on vacation in Morocco, and these lyrics match this song. This is almost Hey Jude magnificent, a pop song as far as I'm concerned, and a totally badass rocker. All right, that covers what would have been a magnificent LP, right? But we've got two more sides to talk about. And so side three is up, and so is the magnificent song, In the Light. Now, if you just fast forward past that intro chant, you would have gotten a almost just regular cut from Led Zeppelin here. It's not that that part of the song is lacking, and they did record that as a track unto itself, but they wisely heard that, and they knew it was only a portion of a song not yet written. And so they slipped this chant in at the beginning, and with this chant and what comes later, this is the very flavor of Physical Graffiti as a magnificent album. All right, so next up, what Led Zeppelin album would be complete without a little doodle piece from Jimmy Page? And of course, that is totally covered in this piece that he recorded as early as 1970. Don't tell me they didn't have a vision right from the start. They just played it, I think, a little safe with their first two albums because they had this recording. And of course, I'm talking about Bron You Hour. And I know I'm mispronouncing that, but it's the cowboy in me, folks. I can't beat it out of me to save my life. Now, as I've said before, Houses of the Holy, from the time it came out, what was that, 73, until probably 20 years. As I said, I love that album. It was my favorite Led Zeppelin album for decades, and it was about 2 decades there. But somewhere in the mid-90s, I gave a re-listen to this album, always one of my favorite, but not my ultimate favorite, right? But I was either in the right headspace to listen to that album that day. I placed Physical Graffiti on my remaining turntable and played all 4 sides. And for the first time, I actually liked this next track. You know, when the album first came out, Down by the Seaside, I thought it was a joke song, and I didn't take it very seriously. But for whatever reason that day, I heard this. So I did some research on this song, and I found out, no, it was actually a homage, a serious homage to what they heard from Neil Young, especially during his Harvest period. Now, as I've said in past videos, while I lived in North Carolina for my junior year in high school, I discovered Harvest, and I consider it one of the greatest albums in rock. It would be less than 6 months later that I purchased Houses of the Holy, and to my ears at that time, those were 2 completely different approaches of music. But in this song, we can see there have always been similarities, even to the more traditional American country approach of Neil Young. Next up, the closer for side 3, 10 Years Gone, a song with lyrics that Robert Plant wrote about very personal issues regarding past love affairs. Wonderful lyrics, really, and one of the very best tracks on this entire album, and very wisely placed here. This is a song that has hints of the entire album to it, and almost invites the listener to continue the journey on to side 4 of this wonderful album. All right, so track 1, 4th side of Physical Graffiti, Night Flight, a song that was originally recorded and written for Led Zeppelin 4, but you know, very wisely left off of that album. Even if you got that full album and this cut, this song doesn't quite fit. But does that make this a weak track? No, not at all. This is a wonderful song, one of the best tracks on the album. It fits perfectly here, and guess what? It has room to breathe on this album. Everything else on 4 was more focused in another direction. They were wise to leave it off that album, and they were smart enough to bring it on to this wonderful project. Next up, one of my favorite tracks on the album, the Wanton song, and it is necessary for this song to be on this album. This is almost the Crunch Part 2 to me, and I love it when Led Zeppelin gets ziggy-zaggy like this. I just love this whole approach, and anytime they do this, it's almost like with the Beatles when Paul would occasionally write a song that sounded like it was written from the 30s, you know, When I'm 64, you know, songs like that. With Led Zeppelin going in this direction, this is their little oddity section to their total sound, and I love this. If this song was not on this album, I don't know if I would rate this album as high as I do. All right, so the next track. Now, don't get me wrong with this, but if there is a weaker cut on this album, I would have to say it is Boogie with Stu. Now, when you realize this is just a jam session, you know, as jam sessions go, this is not a bad track, all right? This is a good track. And there's a part of me that always loved jam session albums even. I love the feel of a good jam. But with Led Zeppelin often being much more structured, I've always felt that this song felt uneasy. But again, back to the mid-90s, and I heard it for the first time, and it fits so wonderfully in this album. Is it the strongest track? No, not by far, but it adds flavor to this album, and I'll explain that a bit more with the very next track we're going to discuss. You see, it's with Black Country Woman that Led Zeppelin, they don't jam, but they live record in the garden at Stargroves. And just as the recording begins, the band's got it all worked out, and we hear the performance. But there's an airplane that you can hear overhead, right? Initially, Led Zeppelin was not going to release this track. They felt it spoiled the recording until they started thinking, no, this just adds atmosphere. This adds a realism, an almost special effect to the entire song. Now, with this song played live outdoors and the previous song being a jam session, here side 4 creates an identity unto itself and becomes a must listen. This is why the entire album must be listened from beginning to end in order as far as I'm concerned. The final track, the perfect track to end this album, Sick Again, written primarily about groupies they had met along the way and recorded pretty much as a straightforward Led Zeppelin track. But what a track! The track is led by, of course, what we've become so familiar with, the interplay between Jimmy Page and Bonzo. Guitar, drums, drums, guitar. The give, the take, the take, the give. It's wonderful, and it's so evident on this song, which absolutely ends this album on a complete up note for me. Now, this album would continue to be my favorite Led Zeppelin album for the next 10 years. Only after a complete reevaluation somewhere in the mid to late 2000s did I even rank this album as any lower than number 1. Now, if you've seen my video on my rankings of the Led Zeppelin albums, you know that I currently rank this album at number 3. But I also explained in that video, when you're dealing with Led Zeppelin, you're dealing with masterpieces. Often, the difference between these albums is just merely a gauze of a curtain. And it is so hard to place them in any type of ranking. This magnificent album, I feel, compares very favorably with the Beatles' magnificent album titled The Beatles, but known to us all as the fabulous White Album. This is Led Zeppelin's White Album, bar none, and in my opinion, holds quite favorably, and these are my 2 favorite double albums in rock and roll, bar none. You know, when I listen to this album, I actually picture Led Zeppelin playing like in a meadow somewhere. Even on Kashmir, I feel that. Now, that's how it affected me that day, and it's always been a picture I have, even when I play it to this day. What are your favorite tracks on this album? Do you even consider this one of Led Zeppelin's good albums? Is it their best album? Do you disagree with me? It should be ranked higher? Not only what are your favorite cuts, but what are your favorite moments on the album? Okay, so that wraps up the video for today, folks. This has been one tough one to put together when you have to listen to a double album worth of material over days just so that you can get your thoughts around it. It can be quite daunting, but it's been worth it. What a trip it's been for me. It's been a pleasure to put this together for you. And let me know if you agree with what I have said about this album. Thank you so much for all of your input. If you see any names in front of me, as usual, this is my way of saying thank you to any new subscribers to the channel. It's a shout out to them for joining the tribe. A thing that's not very difficult, by the way. All you have to do is just hit that subscribe to the tribe button and hit that top bell notification, and you'll be notified of all of my future videos.